All right, now let's look at the menstrual cycle. To many, the menstrual cycle can be a a tidbit difficult, but we're going to try and simplify it as much as possible while sticking to the curriculum. We hope we achieve that. So let's start. What is the menstrual cycle? Basically, these are the changes that occur in your ovaries, but not only your ovaries, but also your uterus. For example, the changes that happen in the endometrium of a female over a 28-day period. Yes, with different females it differs, but on average it's 28 days. We say that it goes on for 28 days. Then it begins when? At puberty. When you hit puberty, we've discussed puberty in our previous lessons. If you do not know what puberty is, visit some of my one of my lessons on puberty. And ends at menopause. So basically, when you stop producing your ovum. Great. Now, it contains two separate cycles. Your menstrual cycle. But these happen simultaneously. That is your ovarian cycle. That means the changes that happen inside your ovaries. Then, at the same time, while these changes are happening, the uterine cycle is taking place. The changes in your uterus, the thickness of the endometrium, basically. This happens when? During this 28 days. During these 28 days, your ovaries will develop and release an ovum. While this is happening concurrently, the uterus basically changes according to which stage of the menstrual cycle you are in. That is the menstrual cycle. Now, let's dive right into the ovarian cycle. It's the most important one. But before we go into this, remember the menstrual cycle is controlled by hormones. Four hormones, basically. Two are released in the pituitary gland, and two are released in the female gonad, which is the ovaries. So, two are luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which are released in your in the part of your brain called the pituitary gland, and then to progesterone and estrogen come from the ovaries. Now, follicles. Let's start with follicle stimulating hormone. It comes from the pituitary gland. It stimulates the growth and development of the follicles. Then it stimulates the production of estrogen secretion. Good. The estrogen will come from the developing follicles. And where do we find follicles? Inside the ovaries. So that's why we say estrogen is actually produced and secreted by the ovaries. But there wouldn't be estrogen. There wouldn't be a stimulation of estrogen if there was no stimulation of follicles. We'll get into that later. Now, it stimulates follicular growth, the follicle growth. Okay, great. Then, what happens? Luteinizing hormone is the ovulation hormone. I call it the ovulation hormone. It causes the follicle to rupture, releasing the ovum. And then results in the formation of a body called the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum basically secretes your progesterone, the pregnancy hormone. Let's start with the pregnancy hormone. It thickens the uterus lining or the uterine lining, or aka the endometrium. Then it also inhibits follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. We'll get back to it. That is the feedback mechanism. Good. Then the estrogen thickens the uterine lining as well. It thickens the uterine lining as well, and then inhibits FSH and luteinizing hormone for most of the cycle. It also stimulates now FSH and LH release before ovulation. But that we'll touch later on. Let's start with the ovarian cycle. The ovarian cycle, right? Good. Remember, in this slide, I told you that we have these four hormones. All of these four hormones will play a part in the ovarian cycle. Good. Let's get to see how they'll play a part. First things first. I'm not going to mention the hormones. I'm just going to go through the whole cycle. Where does the cycle start? Remember when you did oogenesis, we said the germinal epithelial cells found in the ovaries, né? They basically undergo mitosis to form many follicles. What happens to those follicles? Only one of those follicles gets to enlarge. You see now, we're going that way, from one to the other way. These smaller and little yellow things are what your follicles are. Yeah? Then one gets to be chosen. Remember from oogenesis, one gets to be chosen. There can only be one. And then it develops into a follicle. Yeah? The large enough follicle will be known as the Graafian follicle. Ne? Good. Now, the Graafian follicle, let's say this one, largest one here. Ne? Inside it, you find that there is an ovum also maturing. Ne? The oocyte. Now, during day 40, this is day 40, ne? The Graafian follicle ruptures. Ne? It ruptures, breaks apart basically, well, not apart, but it ruptures, bursts. Then it releases the ovum, the mature ovum. Where? Day 40. With me? Great. Now, from day 14 up until day 28, between, let's say, this one is day 15, and then up until day 28, a sequence of events will follow. Now, after the follicle ruptures, it is no longer the follicle. It is now known as the corpus luteum. You with me? So, from day 1 up until day 14, we had, between day 1 and 14, we had a Graafian follicle, but it ruptured and released what? And released the mature ovum. And as it ruptures, after it ruptures, it creates a body known as the corpus luteum. It is the corpus luteum. Now, good, the yellow body. Now, the corpus luteum will basically remain active for these days. If there's no fertilization that happens, remember, as it remains active, what happens to the egg? Or not the egg, but the ovum. The ovum travels in the fallopian tubes. If you're Virgin Mary and there's no intercourse, and then that means there will not be any fertilization. The corpus luteum starts to shrink and then it disintegrates. It degenerates. And then the whole process will repeat itself over and over again. That is what happens in the ovaries. With me. So we start off with follicles that are created from the germinal epithelial cells. One will be stimulated to grow and enlarge until day 14 when it releases the mature ovum. And then after it ruptures, it is no longer known as the Graafian follicle. It is now the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum basically remains active up until there's no fertilization during these days, and then if there's no fertilization, it starts to shrink and eventually disintegrates. Hallelujah. Great. Now that we've seen all of this, now we understand this part. Let's bring in the hormones now. Now it becomes fun. Let's bring in the hormones during this ovarian cycle. Now, during the ovarian cycle, we said that follicles are released, but only one of these follicles will get to basically enlarge. What stimulates the development of this follicle? Come on, it's easy. The follicle stimulating hormone. The follicle stimulating hormone basically is responsible for the development of the follicle into a large enough follicle known as the Graafian follicle. And where is it from? From the pituitary gland. You with me? So once the follicle now develops, the follicle is responsible for secreting, it secretes another hormone known as estrogen. Now, follicle stimulating hormone gets released from the pituitary gland to basically be responsible for the development and growth of or enlarging of the follicle. Once the follicle is large enough, it releases estrogen. Levels of estrogen start to rise as the days go by. Before day 40, you will notice that normal. We need to prepare the endometrium, that's your uterine lining. It needs to thicken. And what better way to do that than estrogen? Estrogen plays a role in the uterine cycle as well. It thickens the uterine line in preparation for pregnancy. All right, but the high levels of estrogen stimulate the secretion of the second hormone from the pituitary gland, which is the luteinizing hormone. The brain picks up that there are high levels of estrogen, right? That means the uterine lining is almost ready. Not completely, but almost. It's been thickened by estrogen. All right, then on day 14, then we must release the egg. And what stimulates the rupturing of the follicle? It is the luteinizing hormone. Yeah? It stimulates the follicle, the Graafian follicle, to grow and eventually rupture. Rupture to release mature ovum. Hey, okay, sharp. Mature ovum is released. Why? Because there was luteinizing hormone. Then, after luteinizing hormone stimulates the rupturing of this Graafian follicle during this time, you will notice that now there's a change. We have a turnaround now. There's a change in what? There's a change in the Graafian follicle. It's no longer going to be the Graafian follicle. It's going to be the corpus luteum after day 14. So, what is day 14? Day 14 is known as the ovulation. Hence, I told you that luteinizing hormone, luteinizing hormone is basically your ovulation hormone. It causes the Graafian follicle to rupture, resulting in the formation of the corpus luteum. Hey man, this is nice. Right. Okay. Now, after ovulation, after on day 14, ovulation happens. That means the release of the mature ovum. Notice that on day 14, if I was to give you a graph, which hormones would be at their highest? Estrogen and luteinizing hormone, especially luteinizing hormone, will be at its peak during day 14, and it will start to lower as the days after day 14. Now we are left with one hormone, that is progesterone. And where is progesterone produced? Progesterone is produced in the ovary. Where in the ovary? By the corpus luteum. That's why it's the pregnancy hormone. Notice that progesterone is released or secreted after day 14, after ovulation. In preparation for what? Let's go back to it. In preparation for pregnancy. It thickens the endometrium further, giving it what? Giving the endometrium more glands and blood vessels for what? And for pregnancy, right? Great. All right, that's the function of progesterone. So the corpus luteum, let's do this. The corpus luteum secretes progesterone. Then what is the function of progesterone? Now the progesterone basically thickens the endometrium or the uterine lining, providing more blood vessels and glands in preparation for pregnancy. That is during the ovarian cycle. Notice that I'm giving you hints of what's happening basically in the not the endometrium, but the yeah in the endometrium, in the cycle of the endometrium. So as we're going through the ovarian cycle. Now, if, like I said, you are Virgin Mary, there's no fertilization during these days, then the corpus luteum starts to disintegrate or starts to shrink and then disintegrate, degenerates. If the corpus luteum degenerates, what happens to the level of progesterone? It will start to decrease. And then the whole cycle begins over and over again. Great. Now, let's go over it again. Now, we said that during the menstrual cycle, two cycles happen. The ovarian cycle, the development and release of the ovum. We got that covered, right? Then the uterine cycle, the changes in the uterine cycle. Good. This brings me to my next picture right now. Since we talked about the hormones and the development of the follicle, now let's talk about the endometrium. The endometrial changes that happen. Remember, I said all of these happen concurrently, simultaneously. We are solving simultaneous equations here. Yeah, good. Let's start. From day 1 up until day 7. Day 5, yeah. Day 5 to 7. Basically, it's a process called menstruation, right? What happens? Uterus lining is being shed. This is menstruation during day 1 to 5. The uterus lining is shedding, meaning that's when women start to see blood being passed out through the vagina. Let's notice what's happening elsewhere. Estrogen levels are low, progesterone levels are low. Okay, let's see. Your luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormones are still relatively normal. Then around day 7, ne, what happens? Follicle stimulating hormone enters the game. Ne? Stimulating what? Stimulating the development of the follicle up into a mature follicle, the Graafian follicle. Now, follicle stimulating hormones are high during that time. And then once the follicle is mature enough, it will secrete estrogen. That's where you see estrogen levels now here start to peak, start to go up. Ne? Good. Now, what other hormone will be released just before ovulation day, which is day 14? Luteinizing hormone, which causes the follicle to further grow up until it ruptures, releasing a mature ovum. That is the process of ovulation. And what causes that? The luteinizing hormone from the pituitary gland. So during day 14, luteinizing hormone is at its peak. And estrogen also is very high in the body. Because why? It is thickening the endometrial lining. Ne? Your endometrium, your uterus lining. After day 14 though, what happens? Corpus luteum is formed from that ruptured follicle. Then, if corpus luteum is present, it's going to start releasing what hormone? Progesterone. Then you'll see here the yellow part, progesterone levels around day 20 to 21 to 22 there. The progesterone levels are very high. They are very, very high. Yeah? Good. What happened to the luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormone? Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone levels started to drop when progesterone was secreted. But what happens? Progesterone, its main purpose is to do what? Its main purpose is to further thicken the endometrium, giving it more blood vessels and glands in preparation for pregnancy. So that means now the hormone that is very prominent in the body right now, oh yes, is what? Is your progesterone. Now notice that when progesterone is at its highest, the levels of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone start to drop. But we'll get to that later. Then, as time goes by, there is no fertilization. If there's no fertilization, what happens? Corpus luteum starts to shrink, and as it shrinks, progesterone levels start to decrease. The decrease in progesterone levels will spike the rise of estrogen. Yeah? Will basically trigger the rise of estrogen levels in the body. Now, no fertilization, the corpus luteum completely degenerates, and then we have no progesterone in the body. Low levels of progesterone, meaning that it will start to stimulate the release of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, and the whole process begins over and over again. In the next topic, in the next video, we'll look at basically the feedback mechanism of progesterone, uh, of these hormones, né? Basically. So we'll also look at some questions that you might be asked. I think it's best we do some questions and then take it from there.